this year with close work from the budget advocates to develop that survey. We try to ask the exact right questions as best as can be determined months in advance of the real struggle over the budget. From that budget survey, we have both, make available the Chief Administrative Officer, the Deputy Mayor for Budget and Finance, and other staff to take the results of the budget survey and other issues as they're arising in Regional Budget Day, which happened this year in March. And the budget advocates, in a new development that was worked out by the budget advocates, they elected budget advocates from the budget reps in the October meeting. And so from October until all the way through this budget process, they've been digging in and digging deep. They've met with many of the general managers. They've met with labor on multiple occasions. They've met with the Chief Administrative Officer. They gave their ultimate white paper to the mayor in March. The mayor responded by having our performance management unit vet each of the proposals, and we're in the process of vetting that. They met with the budget committee and then with the full council on their white paper. The council has directed CAO and CLA to vet the white paper proposals. And so I would just say that this is for me, a remarkable sign of the maturing of neighborhood councils to get in deep, dig deep on the budget process. And I just wanted to commend their work because, quite honestly, they're in many ways more familiar with the budget at this point than many of us in the city are familiar with the budget. And it's all on their own personal time to dig deep to understand what are the problems that we as a city face. And so I just wanted to thank them and commend them for their work, and you'll hear from them later today. What I've been asked to do is to kind of give the big, broad picture brushstroke on the budget. And let me just say that the way I see the big budget picture this year is that this is the year that labor truly does save the city of Los Angeles. 85%, I think, of all of the costs in the city on the general fund are salaries, our wages, our benefits, health care, etc. That's how the city delivers the vast majority of its services. If you think of it, police and fire and rec and parks and all the other assets we have as a city, it's primarily people that are delivering those services. And quite honestly, with the problems that we face, it's really labor that has is the biggest piece of the equation in the conversation. They have in the past. When I say that, Julie Butcher says, "You mean again?" And so just to explain what she means by that, last year, in negotiating the early retirement program, that was played out in this past year, it was a way in which, instead of reducing probably 3,000 people at the bottom of the ranks of the city in terms of layoffs, it was a way for 2,400 people to voluntarily to walk out the door. It took a lot of our knowledge as a city, but it also did some remarkable things. Instead of putting pressure on pushing people back down into their prior positions and back out into the streets at a later point in their career, it allowed for upward mobility, for people to actually take on new challenges. It created a whole different environment inside of the city of Los Angeles. It also created opportunities in the special funded positions that were paid for with special funds, where there were early retirements for people that had the skills to migrate to those jobs off of the general fund. It created an environment where, quite honestly, every single layoff would have been litigated and arbitrated to one where it was a mutually agreed on process that allowed for an earlier process to reduce the size of the city workforce. And I think Julie could kind of clarify the other ways in which it played out, but it was in some ways a critical way in which labor stepped up, because the cost of the early retirement was covered by the increased contribution to the early retirement program, right, is the key part of the conversation. So that was the much of the big picture last year. I don't think it played out as well as it should have played out. It wasn't understood as well as it should. But this year, you're going to see the big picture in terms of, so I'm going to go through big picture what the crisis is. So can we get, okay, we'll do it one by one here. You have in front of you color for the first 50 people and black and white for the after the first 50. But first look at the final general fund deficit to solve, that number right there. And I just want to walk you through why you'll hear different numbers and what the different numbers are based on. Right, so the estimated revenues are $4.3 billion. Estimated expenditures are $4.7 billion, right? And so there's the $350 million deficit to be solved that was in the mid-year FSR, Financial Status Report, from the City Chief Administrative Office, or Officer, right? That's the $350 million number that you've often heard. In addition to that, there are other things that we've used to solve the budget in the past that were one-time solutions that we couldn't assume would be one-time solutions again. Let me just walk you through what those are. First one is that in this past year, we've, working with the Police Protective League, we were able to get $80 million in savings by going away from any kind of cash overtime for LAPD officers. Now, there's a downside to going away from cash overtime, because what happens is a police officer will do their normal beat, and then the next morning they have to be at court, right? And while they're at court, that's not part of their, say, their normal beat. If it's off hours, they would normally get paid overtime, cash overtime, to make sure that they would stay on the beat the rest of the time. What they've had to do is they've had to do what's called CTO time, or compensatory time off, to be able to take time off at a future moment when they're on the beat to make up for the time that they're, say, in court, which is where they spend a fair amount of their time, right, and other duties. So a loss of cash overtime, replacing it with CTO time, or compensatory time off, is a reduction in the availability of having police on the beat. It's not a good thing, right? But that's the way it was solved last year in terms of $80 million in lost cash overtime. So that $80 million in lost cash overtime, is that how we're going to solve it this year? We would rather not solve it this year in that way, because that's a loss of services. So that $80 million is back on the table in the conversations with all of our employee organizations. The second one is $41 million in the modified coverage plan. The modified coverage plan, as you know, is a way in which there's sort of a rolling, kind of like a blackout, but a reduction of different trucks at different stations at different times. And it's managed to try to maximize the delivery of services, but it's a reduction in services, right? And so the UFLAC, United Firefighters of Los Angeles City, would say that there's potential increased response time. And there is potential increased response time, and we all know that potential increased response time is potential loss of life, right? So modified coverage plan is not the ideal solution, right? There are other solutions that could be better structured. And so that amount of money that was saved last year to resolve the budget deficit is back on the table looking for a better solution this year. The next one is there's a $48 million that's built into the $350 million that came from the CAO's office, which is basically each year, in terms of new construction and some existing construction, 1% is set aside for infrastructure, infrastructure improvements, and maintenance on new structures. And we are not going to be able to afford to do that this year. We have never walked away from that before. We're going to walk away from it this year in what our proposal is. Right? It has bad implications as well, but that's what's going to, you'll see on Wednesday in the mayor's budget proposal. The 1% infrastructure maintenance fee, mostly for new construction, is something that is a choice we can make as a city. And in a crisis situation, we're feeling like that's the kind of choice that we will need to make this year to address our deficit. And then you have $48 million, then you have, so the adjusted deficit you see at $423 million, and then there's a revenue reduction from the financial status report beyond a reduction from what we were working with previously, which is $40 million, right? And that's not really a reduction in sales tax, but it is a reduction in the documentary transfer tax from what was projected. It's a reduction in utility users tax. So for example, how many people are getting rid of their phones in their homes right now? Their hard lines? Anybody? Guess what? That's a reduction in utility users tax. That's going to be an ongoing reduction that we as a city are going to have to live with as people are routinely shutting down their hard lines and just using cell phones only. Right? So there's an additional $40 million reduction in revenue projections that came in the FSR. Now that's been adjusted up a little bit, that you'll see on the other side of how we're going to solve this. But that gets you to the $463 million that we have to resolve in this year's budget. And the ways in which it's going to be approached and resolved is on the other side, which is you're getting a preview. You're getting as deep a preview as really has gone out anywhere right now of the budget that's coming out on Wednesday. Let's go to the wheel or the pie chart on the second page, which you have in front of you. And these are the primary ways in which it's going to be resolved. You know, I actually need to find a single piece of paper. One second. Hold this. Let's see if I have it here. So I'm going to start not at the top of this list, but I'm going to go through it in a way that is a little more logical. So if you look at the $463 million in deficit that needs to be resolved in this year's budget, right, the way in which it's been addressed has been I think, thoughtful and kind of profound conversation within the city that's happened largely with the labor partners with the city about how it is that we're going to get through this period without significant additional reductions in services. And in fact, how can we bring back some of the services that we lost by doing the approach to last year's budget? Furloughs, for example. Are furloughs a reduction in service? Very much so. Right? Furloughs are not a great solution, but there are other ways to kind of resolve it. So if you look at the dark green color, that is the way in which people think about cutting structural deficits, which is basically reducing services and laying off individuals or sweeping positions that are currently open. So the big thing that's happened is we have a managed hiring process in the city. We don't backfill positions that are laid off that don't have revenue attached to them, unless it's an absolute necessity, an emergency. So it goes through a managed hiring process. You need complete agreement between the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office, the Chief Administrative Officer's Office, the CAO, the CLA, and the Mayor's Office all have to agree in order to be able to backfill a position that somebody who has left the city or transferred to some other department. Right? And so it's hard to get complete agreement from those three entities on the managed hiring process. Some happen, especially when they are revenue generating, right? Or especially when they're critical services for the city. Most do not. In the last year, there have been 1,600 people that have left an existing position, either leaving the city or going to another department. Those 1,600 positions are positions that have been largely swept in this year's budget. And so a bulk of the $100 million in structural savings that are permanent are coming from, again, the managed hiring process in sweeping the 1,600 positions. Some of those are general fund, some of them are special fund, right? And so we're not getting the benefit of this sweeping of the special fund positions. But there is, again, an opportunity to move people that are qualified to those special fund positions, and that is happening sort of naturally. In addition to that, other structural changes that have happened and are happening is there is a consolidation between the Treasurer's Office and the Office of Finance, right, which is the one major consolidation. There's a review process for the Personnel Department picking up personnel functions in some of the other departments, so a consolidation of some of the functions, right? You also have you know, a percentage cut that each department has to find ways to address, right? And they can't address it through furloughs because the furlough conversations are happening with the bargaining units. It's not happening with departments. So their cuts that have to happen in department budgets, they have to figure out how to do it through a small reduction in services or in a layoff or through the loss of all sweep positions, right? So then the next part to look at in terms of trying to provide some rationality, because the bulk of the conversation to understand the city is the second part, the second hour. And the second hour is we have a chance to talk to one of the key players in the coalition of city unions that has worked hardest and longest to figure out how to save the city and save services for city residents, right? And Matt Szabo, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff, who has been in those conversations from day one. So you are having a remarkable opportunity to talk to the real conversation about what is happening in this year's city budget. So let me just point out a couple other things that will be of interest. So on new, let me go to the right, and I'm having a hard time reading. What's in purple? So what does it say? What's it say right there? Swaps. Okay, special fund swaps. Right. So here's one where there's I could use them. So alley cleaning is actually going to go from street services as a general fund responsibility over to sanitation. And sanitation has some additional resources to be able to do that. So that is what's called a special fund swap. And there's a basis for doing that. I think all parties agree it makes sense. And so that's one of the ways in which revenue is being saved in a special fund swap. I don't think the full 40 million is there, but that's an example. New revenue, it shows $12 million in new revenue. That's an adjustment of what was the doomsday scenario, in my opinion, in the CAO's budget that showed $40 million less in revenue in this year's budget at the FSR moment, right, when it came out about a month ago, to where current projected revenues are right now. And so there's, instead of it being a $40 million reduction, it's actually a $28 million reduction. So this shows $12 million additional dollars that we believe are there in the new revenue projection. And then there's one-time solutions. And these one-time solutions, right, are going to create some controversy, but I think they're fully justifiable. But what this is refinancing of existing debt. So there's both and it's going to be using what's called corporate paper, which I think is at 0.3%, less than 1% cost. It's a 5-year financing or refinancing of debt. So one of it is about $30 million in debt from the convention center, right, which will be money that, even though the convention center pays for itself in terms of its costs, it doesn't pay for itself in terms of the bonds that have funded the construction of the new convention center. So this is a refinancing of the convention center debt that will allow us to be able to come through with about $28 million to solve our deficit during this crisis period, and it's at less than 1% over 5 years. Right? And the second piece of it, which we're going to resolve through a one-time fix, is a financing of the early retirement program, one-time costs, which also makes sense. I think it's about $20 million. And those are the one-time solutions, which in general, budget people do not like to do. It would be nice if we didn't have to do one-time solutions, but this is a kind of crisis that requires us to do that. And so that's what you're going to see in the mayor's budget as well. And then the final pieces of the conversation are the parts of the conversation that really both Julie and Matt are in a much better position to speak to, which is that, you know, in general, furloughs are ways in which the city, it appears that the city has the ability to impose. It seems that there is some obligation to negotiate on furloughs. There's been some recent court cases on this as well. It's a very active, litigated area as to what cities are allowed to do and not allowed to do, because furloughs in many ways are kind of like, you know, reductions in salaries, or are kind of like layoffs, temporary layoffs, right? So it appears that the city has the right to do the furloughs based on recent court cases, although different lawyers would disagree on that interpretation, exactly what that means, right? But in exchange for not doing furloughs, which are a straight up reduction. So 26 furlough days in a year is a 10% reduction in people's wages, right? And that's what we've done for much of this last year, is a 10% cut in people's wages. But there are other ways to structure a solution. And so labor and the city have been talking about better ways to come up with those shortfalls other than furloughs that would allow the services to continue. And that's the conversation that you're going to hear from Julie and Matt. And so I think that's where I would leave my part of the presentation, but you're getting a remarkable preview of what very few people have seen. You're getting a level that the City Council is getting right now. Yeah. And so do we want to stay on this conversation, or how do you want to do this? Stephen, do you want to come up?
We'll come back for questions. Dr. D.
Yeah. Larry, it seems
No,
to me...
we're going to hold on questions.
Oh, okay.
We're going to stay with so Ron Galperin was neighborhood council budget advocate for 3 years, I believe, and then is now the chair and has been the chair of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency. And in the conversations of the city's budget, lots of people have lots of recommendations about things they are intimately aware of, ideas for balancing the budget. Some of them small, some of them big. But the Commission on Revenue Efficiency has been dealing with how we collect money and also how we operate. And so to that end, this is the other element of the big picture, the recommendations of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency, and also an example of how a neighborhood council board member, budget advocate, and now commissioner has partnered with the city in looking for solutions. So Mr. Galperin, if you give us an overview of the core recommendations and how that plays into the budget.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Ron Galperin, and I am pleased to be here as chair of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency. Wanted to really thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you for everybody who is here, because there are a lot of choices that you have of what you can do on a Saturday morning, especially a sunny Saturday morning. And the fact that you're here is a tremendous testament to how much you really care about the city and helping to make a difference. You've no doubt heard some sobering news, and you'll continue to do so over the course of this morning, and some painful choices and things that are not necessarily good news. In fact, some of it is downright bad. But I think there's also some good news here, which is that the problems that we have in the city of LA from a financial point of view are fixable. In fact, they're eminently fixable, but they are going to require some leadership. They're going to require making choices, some accountability, some creativity, and some organization. What I'd like to talk about is a little bit about the Commission on Revenue Efficiency, how we came to be, a little bit about my own odyssey that brought me to the point of chairing this commission. A little bit about the blueprint for reform of city collections, which we issued several months ago, and the phase of work that we're in right now as a commission. So, first of all, a little bit about this commission and about my own odyssey. A couple of years ago, I remember seeing an email that went out from the council member from the district that I lived in, continue to live in. And it was a well-written email that was explaining to all the constituents why our streets were not going to get repaved. And it detailed how we have 6,500 miles of streets in the city of LA, and that year we were budgeted for about 175 miles of repaving, plus a little extra for transit corridors. You divide that up, that 175 by 15 council districts, and you're left with pretty much no repaving over the course of the year, and a wait of 30 to 40 years to get your street repaved. I looked at this and I thought, this is insane. It's a very well-written letter and it explains the problem, but what about the solutions? And why are we in this mess? And that led me to start getting obsessed with the city budget, and I had an opportunity to pursue this obsession through my involvement on a neighborhood council and with the neighborhood council budget advocates. And I really want to give kudos, first of all, to this year's neighborhood council budget advocates, and I see their chair walking in the door at this very moment, and for just an outstanding job and for taking the role of the budget advocates to another level. And also to really give kudos to the mayor's office, and most notably to Deputy Mayor Larry Frank, who was a tremendous partner in making that whole neighborhood council budget process as meaningful as it has become. And each year it's become more meaningful. There's more meat on those bones. And you had a tremendous part in that. So thank you very much. Now, in speaking with a number of different council members, the lead on creating this commission was by Council President Eric Garcetti, who really saw the need to create a special commission, not a permanent one, but one that is ad hoc, to really delve into the issue of collections and to delve into the issue of revenues and opportunities for efficiency. And that is what we have sought to do. There are 7 members of the commission. We were created about a year ago. Actually, we're just about at the end of our term because we're not supposed to be around forever, although there's a motion now to extend us for another 3 months so that we can complete our work. 2 members are appointed by the mayor, 2 by the council president, and then 1 by the controller, and 2 others by council members. And I have the honor of chairing this, which is an amazing group of people. And they represent a cross of a variety of different expertise. We have people who have been in the collection business. We have a former council member who's our vice chair, Cindy Misikowski, who's just outstanding. We have the representative of the Coalition for LA City Workers, Cheryl Parisi. Everybody that we have on this commission is just wonderful. And we all agree on the following, that the city deserves, every member and every person and every resident of this city, every business deserves a city that works. And we deserve to get our money's worth. And the question is, are we in fact getting our money's worth? And are we doing things as well as we should? And in some cases, the answer is sort of yes. But in many cases, unfortunately, the answer is no. Let's talk about collections for a moment here. And I'll give you the numbers that we found in and that we put into our report, the blueprint for reform of city collections, which, by the way, is available if you go to core.lacity.org. And you'll find that report as well as minutes and agendas for our commission. So here are the numbers. Now, mind you, they're a little bit deceptive, and I'll explain why in a moment, but they're very meaningful nonetheless. A staggering 77%, roughly, of the city's $541 million in non-tax receivables, more than 120 days past due, with about 43% more than 2 years past due. Most of that is uncollectible at this moment. About nearly 50% of accounts eligible for collection agency referrals were actually referred. Less than half of city departments are applying interest or penalties to past due accounts. If you have a choice of whether to pay Bill A or to pay Bill B, and Bill A doesn't have any interest or penalties, which one do you think you're going to pay first? You're probably going to pay B. The city also still has no real centralized billing and collection process. The systems are woefully outdated, although there is progress that is being made in this area, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And this tally that I mentioned doesn't even include uncollected taxes, intergovernmental transfers, unbilled services, and entrepreneurial opportunities for the city. We have vast assets that really are not being put to their maximum use. Now, why did I say some of these numbers are deceptive? Well, two of the biggest pools of this $541 million are from fire department, which is mostly ambulance billings, and from the Department of Transportation, which is mostly parking tickets. Well, let's take the EMS, or the ambulance billings, as an example. And there are about $175 million or so of those billings every year. But let's face it, you send out a bill for $1,000 or more, you're going to get some from insurance companies or from Medicare or from Medi-Cal, but there are an awful lot of people who simply cannot pay. And no matter how you chase after them, they're not going to be able to pay that. And we have to be cognizant of that. A lot of it is not legally collectible that we have on our books, interestingly enough, because if Medicare or if Medi-Cal pays a certain amount, we are not legally, in most cases, able to go after the individual for that difference. But it's still sitting on our books, kind of polluting the numbers, dare I say. And in the case of DOT, the fact is that we collect on in excess of 80% of the tickets that we issue. However, the percentage that we don't collect on with interest and with penalties, it keeps on growing and growing and growing, and it stays on our books. But really, much of it is not going to be collectible. So we've got to clean up our books. And we've got to really look at where the opportunities to collect better. Because there are, in the final analysis, at least as I see it, hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially, that are being left on the table every year. And that is money that can be used to keep people employed, to keep our streets safe, to keep them paved, to keep our trees trimmed. There's a limitless number of things that we quite frankly need in the city. So our number one recommendation, we issued 65 of them, and you can read them all. It's a 109-page report. But number one on the list is the creation of an Inspector General for Revenue and Collections. Not a permanent position and not a permanent bureaucracy, but something which would be an opportunity to really focus on revenue and collections and efficiencies over, say, a 2-year period. The fact of the matter is there are so many different folks that have a responsibility when it comes to this, that with whom does the buck stop is the question that we kept asking ourselves. There's a role, of course, for the mayor's office and for the CAO and for the controller and for the Office of Finance, which was created 10 years ago in the charter to do centralized billing and collections. There are a lot of, the city attorney is involved. There are a lot of folks that are involved, but with whom does the buck actually stop? And so we see that as absolutely being necessary to do coordination. Part of it is also holding the departments accountable for following procedures. The fact is, in 2005, there was an Executive Directive number 5 that was issued by the mayor's office with 7 rather simple bullet points of what departments are supposed to do when it comes to collections. Well, here we are in 2011, and this is a mayor's directive, and we have roughly 50% of the departments that are not in compliance. That's just unconscionable, and they have to be held to account. Centralization is a clear part of how you do better collections, although it's not a panacea. In the following sense, everybody talks about let's centralize collections and we'll solve all of our problems. But at the same time, you've got to balance that with how you give departments some skin in the game. If everything is centralized, and if the departments don't have an incentive to generate money in a creative way, because it's all either going to get swept away or put into the general fund, then what is their incentive? And you can't centralize everything. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to library fines, you're not going to have the Office of Finance sitting there at the librarian's desk collecting fines. It necessarily has to start with departments in many cases. Same is true for Parks and Rec and for others. But there's a lot that we can do technologically. There's also, I think, a tremendous need and a tremendous opportunity to look at things in a completely new way. We're working right now on the issue of parking occupancy tax. Actually, we first took this issue up in November. Not the most sexy subject. However, a lot of money is at stake. Tens of millions of dollars that we don't collect every single year. In fact, we had the president of the Parking Operators Association come and speak to our commission. And you would expect that they would talk about how people are in compliance. But in fact, what we were told is no, the city is probably getting shortchanged anywhere between $20 to $35 million plus per year. By the way, I think that number is 50 to 60, maybe even $70 million a year. But who's to blame for that? We've set up a system in our own ordinances where we have 3 different parties responsible for this. We have the Office of Finance, we have the Police Commission, which grants permits to these operations, and we have the City Attorney's Office. Do you know they each have their own administrative hearing process? Do you know that these administrative hearing processes don't relate to each other? And in the final analysis, we keep on issuing permits to parking operators that owe tens of millions of dollars to us. It's insane, but that happens to be the case. We're actually about to come out with a report of specific recommendations of how to fix this problem. The good news is that it's actually really fixable. We want to intensify consequences for delinquencies, for those who aren't paying. This is not about going after everybody and holding everybody's feet to the fire and making everybody's life difficult, particularly for businesses, which we want to encourage to come and to stay in Los Angeles. But it is about holding those responsible who are not paying their fair share and who are violating the law. We want to see a collections system that has a sense of urgency. Right now, these collections, they stay on our books for 5 years, and then we write them off. We have proposed a complete change to that system so that it follows a clear pattern with clear timetables, goes to collection agencies for a first, then to a secondary collection agency, and then we sell off the debt that we have that has been aging and that we have not collected. And even if you collect a few pennies on the dollar on that aging debt, that is better than sitting around 5 years and waiting to write it off, which also, quite frankly, sends a message to everybody, hey, wait out the city of LA, wait around long enough, and your bill is going to go away. At the same time, we have encouraged amnesty and settlement programs, because there's some people who can't pay, and I'd rather see 20 cents, 40 cents on the dollar than nothing. So there are some tremendous opportunities with that, and actually there is a program right now. So, by the way, if you happen to owe money to the city of LA, now's not a bad time to pay it, because you may get a deal. Talk about the next steps. We are very focused on seeing our recommendations put into place. And frankly, we've waited quite a few months for this to happen. At the same time, on Monday, there's actually going to be a hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee of the Council. And the Office of Finance has prepared a very lengthy and a very detailed response to all of our recommendations, because we included a matrix with each and every one of the recommendations, who would be responsible for it, and then looking at it quarter by quarter by quarter, what has been done to achieve the goals that have been set forth. And that is going to be a very important role for the Office of Finance, but also for the Inspector General, which we would like to see happen sooner rather than later. In the last 2 minutes here, I want to talk about revenue opportunities and about efficiency opportunities. First of all, when it comes to revenue opportunities, it's very interesting. We have people in the city of LA and in the Comptroller's office elsewhere who look at the money that is coming in from other sources, be that from the county, property tax, from documentary transfer tax, from our share of sales tax. but we don't actually look at what is it that we should be getting. We look at what we're getting, but not what we should be getting. And we are often getting shortchanged from these others. And we need to stay on top of that because it adds up to tens of millions of dollars a year. There's also a tremendous opportunity to leverage city assets and to generate revenues from that. And Julie Butcher, who's going to be speaking later, we've had many conversations and she's presented to our commission. For example, how many people know that we own 2 asphalt plants in the city of LA, and we have an interest in a 3rd one as well? Those plants are not operating at full capacity, and there's a tremendous opportunity to make them operate at full capacity, to sell that asphalt to other municipal governments, to cover our costs, to keep people employed. That's not more taxes on people, that's just using the assets that we have to their best advantage. We've also been spending a lot of time with the Bureau of Sanitation. I never thought I would get so interested in trash, I have to tell you. But in the last couple of months, I have become fascinated because there are an incredible number of opportunities to generate money from things that literally go into the air. For example, nitrogen, which we put out into the air off of the Hyperion plant, has a value of millions of dollars a year for a variety of different applications. We can partner even with private businesses to capture and to sell that. That's money out of nowhere. But how do they come up with these ideas? And we've really studied that because it's not just about finding the great ideas, it's about understanding from where they emanate and how do you encourage and how do you cultivate those good ideas. So they actually have a labor management committee that has regular meetings and talks about good ideas. They put them into a matrix, and to each of these ideas they assign an owner. And that owner's job of that idea, as it were, is to follow up and to keep working on that idea until either something comes of it or they realize, let's go on to the next idea. But it's a very entrepreneurial and interesting way of thinking, and it's one that we'd like to see happen in all of the city of LA. There are also tremendous opportunities to generate revenue from encouraging the business climate in the city of LA. We all pay lip service to the idea of having a better business climate and to making LA more business friendly. Although I have to say, we don't always do the best job of it. It's really interesting. I was looking at a list here. I'd be happy to share this at a later point. It's actually a list of all of the various types of special police permits that are required for different types of businesses. Do you know there are 57 different types of special police permits for different types of businesses? Some of them for things that are like massage parlors, right? But we also have, or for auto parking places. But do you know that there's a special permit for skating rinks? There's a special permit that you have to get and fill out paperwork, and the LAPD follows up on this, for hill climbing. Interesting. But what does this cost us to follow up on this, and what does it do in terms of the kind of business climate that we have? And also, I've been involved with the mayor's office and with the chair of the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners regarding Shop LA, which is encouraging people to buy things in Los Angeles. It's an easy thing to do, and we get a share of it, which really helps. Because when you go, I love Glendale, I love Beverly Hills, I love Santa Monica, they're all wonderful, they're all great, but you go shop there, they get our tax revenue, and they get money to pay for their streets, we don't. Expenses. We've looked a lot at actually what needs to be done in terms of contracting reform. And there are many opportunities to save great amounts of money. I've seen contracts with markups on it for supplies that the contractor is furnishing. Well, what incentive is there to reduce that which you are buying if you're a contractor when you're A, getting reimbursed for it, and B, you're getting markup on it? What you're going to do is you're going to, unfortunately, buy more, because that's going to mean more money for your company. So we have to really kind of get a much tighter grip on these contracts. And in doing so, we're going to save ourselves a lot of money. I've also seen contracts and RFPs and RFQs for some crazy stuff. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for warning signs in certain kinds of neighborhood for a tsunami. Or I saw a contract that went out recently for curators for art exhibits at certain facilities in the city. Now, I love art, I love curators, I love exhibits, but is this the time to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these things? I would argue not at this very moment. Risk management.
It's time.
Risk management is a very, very important part of all this, because we have a lot of lawsuits, and if we train people well, then we can reduce those lawsuits and reduce those payouts. Audits. There have been an incredible number of great audits that have been done by this controller, Gruhl, as well as by our previous controller, but many of them never even made their way to council, and that is a travesty. If you have audits that are being done, and they're good ones, we have to act on them and act on them immediately. So, in short, I think that we've got a lot of problems, but I also think we have some amazing opportunities. And there is money out there. And the fact that you are all here is going to make a big difference in helping us reform the city, make it a lot better. And I'm just so pleased to be a part of this, and thank my fellow panelists here as well.
Awesome. Excellent. Joining us on stage is the General Manager of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, Bongwon Kim. And as you recall, last year, some of the departments that we were